Alright guys, another day, another patch for Path of Exile 2. This time around we have a bunch of second round nerfs for trigger jams, pretty much into the gutter. Cast on freeze, cast on critical strike. You likely notice that your builds are now significantly weaker than ever before. But there's some light at the end of this tunnel. We have some other buffs in here too, like leech is way more useful, plus a bunch of other stuff has been fixed, such as passive block, now fully working. So without further ado, let's jump right in. But I do want to start things off with the trigger jam changes. The gist of it is that every trigger jam now takes into account like a third key thing that makes the energy gain important. So in the case of cast on freeze, now it's going to take into account monster power. That's going to be part of the calculation for the energy gain. This means that it's far easier to trigger skills from unique monsters than it is from normal ones, but you also hit many more normal enemies when fighting. Another one was for the cast on ignite. This was especially so using low-level unconditional ailment applications like Flame Wall to ignite enemies for triggering. So in order to make the source of the ignite matter, we are making the energy gain to be dependent on the strength of the ignite. We have also rebalanced all energy gain across the board, and they've also done another hotfix since then for cast on critical strike. Now also takes into account damage of the hit when determining how much energy to gain to prevent the use of high crit low level skills. This should mean using lower hit frequency skills that hit harder are now also much stronger for this. So let me just give you an example with the cast on freeze. I've done a bunch of tests like a few minutes ago. Basically, before the patch, you would get a lot of energy from even a couple of freezes on any monsters. Like 2-3 freezes at max was all that you needed to basically reach 100 energy and auto cast your comet in this case. Now it's going to be different for each type of enemy that you hit with a freeze. So for example, for smaller enemies, you can see it's like 2 to 3%. And for some of the bigger ones, it's like up to 10%, maybe 15%. But what this essentially means is that it takes way more freezes to auto-cast anything from the cast on freeze. I would say about 5 times less frequent as it used to be before this nerf. So this means you're going to more rarely see auto-casts happening, way less comets, and you're going to only see them like popping off really frequently in very large groups of enemies. It can still happen in those situations, but it's nowhere near as satisfying as it used to be. As you can see, we're pretty much going over here for a very long period of time, and you can already see how less frequent those actually happen. And the same pretty much happens for all the others. So if in the case of the cast on freeze, the monster power is what's important, in the case of the cast on ignite, the strength of the ignite is what's important. So I think that if we get to buff ignite more and maybe increase its potency, I think that that should maybe make up for it. I think that cast on ignite is still not as badly nerfed as cast on freeze was. Cast on freeze is definitely like the weakest and got the short end of the stick now. Also in the case of the critical strike one, I haven't tested this yet, but what this means is that the stronger the attacks we use, but they may have a much better chance at triggering those critical strikes, so you could probably still create a build out of it. The only one that I have not noticed getting any nerf whatsoever, and it still works exactly the same as before, is the cast on minion death. Now, I'm not like 100% sure of this, but I have not noticed any real gameplay change whatsoever. They did say they have changed all the energy gains across the board, so in theory, cast on minion death should also be affected. But like I said, in regular gameplay, running with my witch, Infernalist, I've noticed pretty much the same number of occurrences for the cast on minion death. In this case, I'm also using Comet, so it's just as spammy as it was before the patch. But let's move on to some of the other stuff they have done. In terms of changes, I really like a lot of them over here. Passive block now correctly applies to blockable hits from all directions as opposed to just hits from the front, especially if you played like a warrior, but pretty much like anything that has a block. You should now notice a lot more survivability because it now actually takes into account all hits from all directions. You already know about the dodge changes, so I will not cover those. One big quality of life change they have done is they've made inscribed ultimatums and Jin barriers to now display whether you obtain an ascendancy point from it upon completing the Trial of Chaos or Secamus. And what this means is that if you go in game and hover over these items, you're going to notice that they say something along the lines, this is now going to give you an ascendancy point or unlock ascendancy point or something along those lines. But it's quite very useful. In terms of other changes, they've removed world map pins for encounters that were not from specific location in areas, i.e. from monster drops. They've improved attack in place behavior. Also, Rain of Arrows and Firestorm Rest in Peace now have a hit rate limit to prevent cases of them absolutely obliterating very large bosses. This will have little to no impact outside of boss fights with very large hitboxes. So I guess in these situations, you're going to still see them useful, but everything else, yeah, I don't know. I think that this is going to see a massive nerf. Let me know down below in the comments if you are playing with any build that uses these. Now, Leech has been buffed. This is actually quite significant. If you play maybe like a Blood Mage, you might have felt very weak in the early stages. I'm hearing now that the Leech is actually very strong to the point that even 20% Leech makes a huge difference, from pretty much almost not affecting your HP almost at all to now making a significant impact, especially on map clearing. So when you fight a lot of enemies, this should now be way better. That's at least some of the reports that I'm seeing over on Reddit. Also, Bone Shatter now more reliably hits your target. This is especially for the warrior. If you played with maces or whatever, this should be a lot more useful. Also, the duration of armor break has been increased to 12 seconds, previously from only 6. So this is another really great change over there. Added a button to travel to Trial of Chaos on the map. So I guess that if we head over right here and check it out, it should appear. So yeah, you can see right here, click to travel to the Temple of Chaos. I believe that we even had this in some of the previews before the patch. So this should help a lot more because you don't have to go into each respective map and do all of that from there. They've also added art for close combat support, added to the art for the Defiance of Destiny unique amulet, added ascendancy skill points as a keyword, which details how sets of ascendancy points are obtained. Added search functionality for gem cutting and vendor inventories when using a controller. Keybind for searching stash on a controller have also been updated. Added gem cutting restrictions, options for gamepad. Also added suggested support for time in need, suggested for supports for Bone Storm. So all of these right here that you can see. They've also made runes to now sell to vendors for more gold. So now they sell for, I guess, 30. Maybe some of the other ones may sell for more. I'm not sure exactly what their price were before the patch, but yeah, I guess now they sell for a bit more. Also updated art for reserved life and mana, updated the description on runes to clarify that once socketed, they cannot be replaced. They've also updated the description on Hex Blast to clarify that it only detonates a single curse per enemy in its radius. I'm still thinking of making a Hex Blast build because it sounds pretty interesting. There are some good options in there that may or may not actually be a lot more useful. Now that we just played a ton with, I don't know, minion builds kind of become a bit boring. It's also like a ton of screen clutter, so I just don't want to like play this anymore. But I was thinking of giving Hex Blast a try. There seems to be some very interesting combinations here that you can make, and I do want to go over a chaos damage build in the future for the witch, even though maybe fire is the best option right now. Now, in terms of other changes, we have some to the ultimatum. So generally improved balance across the board with ultimatum monsters, bosses, and modifiers, mostly targeting outliers that were too difficult and bringing them in line. Also, the monster density of ultimatum encounters have been made more consistent. Stormcaller runes, blood globules, Heart Tether, and Impending Doom ring no longer spawn while a player is on lift or near the altar in the Val Soul core room. So you likely already even seen some of this, or maybe even it happened to you, but oftentimes you could get stuck by one of these spawning elements, like for example when being close to something like a lever, which would completely prevent you from progressing from that point on, which absolutely sucked. Also fixed the bug where player minions could get stuck at the top of the lift in the Trial of Chaos. Pretty much like 99% of the time my minions were stuck at the top just throwing grenades on like enemies below. But there's a bunch of other big fixes in here as well. Fixed the bug which caused enemies to be primed for stun or electrocute earlier than intended while in a party. Also another one where gemling legionnaires with integrated efficiency ascendancy passive skill allocated could lose their 3 additional skill slots if they were empty when entering a new area. Also fixed the bug with party members reviving when using WASD input, where you could revive party members from too far away. Also fixed a bug where one of the small passive skills in the Flash Crafter cluster was not connected to the notable passive skill. It is possible that your passive skill tree to be reset if you had this cluster allocated, so apologize. There's your free reset, by the way. I think that one of the biggest things that Grinding Gears has to do right now is to go ahead and give us a way to reset our skills, or at least reduce the cost reduction for doing such a thing. Right now, I believe it cost me 4,000 gold to actually do any of that, which is absolutely absurd. It's way too costly and way too prohibitive in a game that should be all about experimenting and building like all bunch of different setups up and making things a lot more interesting. I just think that right now it's way too prohibitive with no single reason. So yeah, just to show you right here, I could not afford at any point to actually reset my skill tree whatsoever. It's just so annoying. And it's even higher for some of these like ascendancies. It's like 18,000 per point, which is completely absurd. And again, I think that this should be made a lot simpler. I think that it should cost 100 or maybe a few hundred gold per each change at the maximum level, or at least at level like 60 plus. A lot of folks actually on the Reddit page are actually complaining about the fact that their classes are essentially bricked. They no longer have any gold to respec, they no longer have any items to go ahead and change things up, they don't have anything, and essentially that character is useless. You cannot do anything with it. Being level 57 and maybe getting forced to go back to normal difficulty chapter 2 or 3 to get down those enemies. It can work, or you can farm vendors. Like, that's the best way you can do it right now. Literally just go at vendors and try to see if there's anything that they sell, especially of rare quality. That's something that you can do. For example, I got this Omen Scepter right here from a vendor. It gives me like 80% increased damage, like 50% increase to spirit, so it definitely helped. But even so, I still think that if I were to get a similar nerf to some of these classes, I would need to maybe start a different class. One of the things that I feel Path of Exile does pretty wrong right now is that it doesn't give me an option to play how I want. Because if I want to play how I want, I may use a skill that's completely useless. For example, I wanted to play with the Fireball, which can still be very good with an autocast or any trigger gem. I still think you can actually do something like that, but it's not as optimal as some of the other options. And this means I'm locked out of better content, and this means I'm going to be forced to follow somebody else's guides that maybe have been like broken from the get-go and will further get nerfed later down the run. Like, for example, I really wanted to play with chaos damage in this case. There are many chaos skills that can be really good. I really enjoyed Essence Drain early on. I really wanted to go with Hex Blast, Despair. There are some amazing abilities over here that I'm not sure I want to use, because that means I'm going to be way weaker. So I'm not going to clear high enough level content, which means I'm not going to get good enough gear and farms to start something else out. It just feeds itself into a perpetual loop where I'm just stuck into whatever the meta is right now, and even that may be nerfed in the future. It's just not fun game design, and I'm really worried about the longevity of the game if they don't actually stay on top of this, at least with the cost of respecking your full character. And I mean, you can see pages and pages of that on the subreddits, on the main accounts, on the website as well, making people fear of experimenting playing the game is not a good idea. Like I just said, it's just better to give you all the tools you want and have you play the way you want instead of following somebody else's guide that was just broken from the get-go. That's pretty much it with the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.